That's better. Just testing. Apologies for that. I had the wrong microphone switched on for some reason, but hopefully you can hear me now. I'm going to have to pad for about 20 seconds to wait for Ellie to give me a nod to say, yes, she can hear me. So let's do an awkward silence. Maybe. Yes, no, maybe. 100%. Yay! Good. Awkward silence over. Terrible start. Let's try that again. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 12 of the M Word. Happy Thursday. I hope it's as sunny and warm as it is where you are as it is here. Lovely day here in the UK. And yeah, welcome to episode 12 of the M Word. Today, we're going to be looking at Autodesk VRED, which is a real-time renderer by Autodesk. It's been around for a number of years now. But actually, it's kind of seen maybe sometimes as difficult to get into, or people don't really think of it as an easy-to-use solution because of maybe some feedback that they've heard from other people. But actually, what I wanted to do today was a real quick start tutorial on how to use the application, because the quality that you can get for very little input is stunning. A lot of people out there might be thinking, oh, okay, I can spend this money on this subscription for this product, but you know, without getting some very sophisticated training or going through hours and hours of self-learning, I'm going to get some quality out of the other end that looks like a potato print or something like that. But actually, with very little input, you can get some stunning outputs, whether you're an Inventor user, a Fusion 360 user, a SolidWorks user, CATIA, or whatever else it might be. So it fits into the functionality really well. So that's the plan for today. For all of you regular visitors, welcome back. It's good to have you here. For anyone that's new to these sessions, we air these pretty much every Thursday unless we've got some problems like last week, so apologies for that. But generally speaking, we air these every Thursday. And the idea here is to share a tea break in the afternoon, a coffee break, or because it's warm today, a water break, and really just talk through some tips, tricks, tutorials, news, industry segments, or whatever you guys want to hear. So give us some feedback, follow us on social media, give us a like, drop us a comment, and let us know the kind of things that you want to hear. And if you are new to us, give us a like, give us a subscribe, hit the bell to turn on notifications so that you can see when we go live and whenever we add content. Because on our YouTube page, we've got an astronomical amount of videos, both long and short, taking you through all sorts of functionality, features, tips and tricks, and demonstrations of the range of Autodesk design products, so and more. So hopefully there's something on there that's useful. But without further ado, we're going to jump straight in and have a look. So let's share my screen, and let's make sure that I don't stay absolutely ginormous today. So let's go smaller into the corner. There we go. And we're going to open up Inventor first of all. Now, for the main part of this tutorial, I'm going to be inside of VRED. But before I get there, I just want to show you a couple of things live with a much smaller model. Because the model that I've brought in is a little bit bigger, so the import took this morning a couple of minutes, and one of the processes I go through to bake some of the ambient occlusion and things like that took about 4 or 5 minutes. So rather than sitting trying to come up with things to talk about whilst it's going through that, I've got a model that's got them pre-saved, but I want to show you the process. So all I'm going to do for the purpose of showing you that particular process live is just draw maybe a box and a cylinder and take those across and show you the process. So it doesn't matter what CAD system you're using. Although I'm using Inventor here, one of the great things about VRED is that it will work, generally speaking, with most of the common CAD systems out there. So what we're going to do is just create a 500 by 500 cube. I'm just going to save this away. I'm going to put it on my desktop just so it's easy to find, and I'm just going to call it part 1. For the purpose of this will hopefully really enable you to see the benefits of VRED, but also the ease of the import and some of the crucial settings that you can get right very early on to give your render a much higher quality. So I've just simply saved a file away. And with that, I'm just going to close down Inventor. We're done with it now. And I'm going to jump into VRED. I'm using 2023. This tutorial, this quick start, will work with pretty much any of the other versions of VRED as well. So whilst I'm on professional, this will work with VRED Design, it will work with 2022, it will work with 2021, and generally speaking, versions that are older than that as well. So generally, if you've got access to this software, this tutorial should help you to get started, which is great. The user interface when you first open it is a bit daunting. It's a slightly different look and feel, and certainly for the generic Autodesk user, the mouse buttons are very different unless you go in and tweak them in the settings. I've left mine as default today, so I'll kind of talk you through it. But once you get your head around it and the fact that it is different, it's actually very easy to use. So what we're going to do first of all is just go up to the import button. We can either go to the file menu or we can come up and just choose import from the ribbon at the top here. So we're just going to choose import. I'm going to go onto my desktop here and I'm going to open up this part that I've previously just created. And literally, this isn't for the whole demo. This is just to show you things that are otherwise going to take me a little bit longer to produce or to import. So it just saves you watching a progress bar, which isn't going to be useful for anyone. So on that import screen, you would have seen the different file formats that we can bring in. So there's a whole host of different files here from not just Autodesk CAD systems, but other ones as well. So you should be pretty well set with whatever you have. And then generally speaking, with that file or files that you're importing, we have a number of options. So we can define where it's coming from. In this case, it's identified it's an Inventor file. And then we can give it some different options. Now, when it comes to importing, generally speaking, these two sections here are really important from my perspective. So tessellation quality. What we have in this model is a square. It's really not going to matter at all whether I bring that tessellation quality in low, medium, or high, because it's literally just a box. If I had something that was very aesthetical, maybe lots of spherical faces or circles or curvature, I might want to try some different import levels, because the time it takes to import on maybe a medium course versus a low course triangulation is astronomical. So when you're first getting started with it, have a play with some different typical files that you use and try and see which suit your designs and pick one that might work. And in some cases, you might bring it on a low and it'll be fine. And maybe you then update the import with a high tessellation later when it comes to producing your final outputs. But in this case, I'm going to bring it in low. The other option that we've got down the side here is we can flush the transformation, just make sure it's all nice and neat inside of VRED, and we can tell it to import things that are only visible in Inventor, so on and so forth. I'm quite happy with all of that, but I do want to stick that on the ground and put it in the center on the origin. That import will basically just take a matter of seconds because it's literally just a box. And I'll bring in a slightly more complicated model in a few minutes once you've been through this process. Once the model's in, it looks very much the same. Controls are very different. So middle mouse is still pan and zoom if you use the wheel. Orbit is just with your left mouse button. So use your left mouse button and move your mouse to do the orbit. You have a view cube, much like you do in Inventor, but shift and middle mouse won't do anything with regards to orbit. So as long as you get your head around that, you're okay. But instantly, what VRED will do is it will use your graphics card in your system. As I've said a few times before, I'm using a fairly high spec mobile Dell Precision. It's got a Quadro P4000, although it's one of the older spec P4000s. So it is an RTX model, so it's a very good laptop card, but it's not the most modern nowadays. This will give you a really nice quality render almost straight away. It will look okay. But there's instantly some things that we can do to enhance it. It's just a plain box, it's got nothing on. But the only other thing I want to do for this particular model is just show you that first step, which generally I always do. So what you want to do is you want to come up to Scene, and then you want to come down to Bake Lights and Shadows. If we come into Bake Lights and Shadows, we just get this dialog box over here. And this allows us to choose to look at the model and bake it in its current state with regards to its lighting, its shadows, ambient occlusion. And just by doing that, which I'm just going to do now, so just going to bake all of this. Lovely. Make sure we select our model in the browser on the left. And I'm just going to say calculate all. This in this model will take seconds. It wasn't even that. I think that's done already. It's like a second. So I'm actually just going to bump it up to highest and just hit calculate again. But what that will do is if you were watching the model close enough, just the edges become a little bit more defined. We start to instantly get a slightly nicer look and feel around the edges of our product. Okay, so first things first, you import the model and then you bake your lighting, your ambient occlusion, and at that point, certainly if it's a large model, just put a save on. Okay, I'm going to jump out of this model now because I've got a more detailed model, a nicer model, which we're going to spend the rest of this tutorial on. But generally speaking, that's phase one that I wanted to show you. Before I open this model up, I'm just going to shout out to the creator of the model. So I just downloaded it from GradCAD, which I really like as a resource for stuff like this. So thank you to Alexander Danko for putting this file together. Really nice model of a Mapex kit. I'm a drummer myself, so nice, realistic, fully detailed model. So I'm going to use that today. Nice model. Thank you, GradCAD, for the resource. But obviously the file is not mine and not related to me or the company in any way. But it's one that I'm using today. And now what I'm going to do is just open up two versions of this. So firstly, this is the starting point. So I've literally imported this file. And then I'm going to open the one that's had the ambient occlusion baked. So if you just take a couple of seconds and just generally have a look at that kit, it looks pretty nice, it looks pretty crisp. But what I'm going to do now is just say File, New, to clear the scene, and then we're going to open the one that's got the baked ambient occlusion and lighting. And what you'll see once that opens up is instantly we've got something that just looks a little bit nicer. So if I again zoom in and just, you know, the edges, and specifically where I've got features and detail like these chamfers and fillets and certain edges, they really start to kick and spring out in the scene. And that's why we go through and do that process. And because it's baked, it's done once and it's forgotten about. It's in the scene, then the scene knows it exists. But if the geometry updates, if you do anything else within the scene, then you know you're going to want to redo that process. But I've just saved you the progress bar today. So I've got about 20 minutes or so left of today's session, which probably isn't enough time to do the entire kit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to separate out probably just the hi-hat and the snare over here with their stands, just so that we can go through and add a few different materials and play around with some shadows and some environments. And then if there's time at the end, I'll bring the rest back in. But what we have is, if we use our graph on the left-hand side, we can start to turn things on and off, much like you would right-click and visible inside of Inventor or another system. We've got the model tree here, and it's just following the hierarchy from Inventor, in this case, or SolidWorks. It's worth pointing out that this model, I did bring it into Inventor first using AnyCAD, just so I've got it in Inventor afterwards if I want to do anything to it. But yeah, it's going to follow the same hierarchy as the file that you brought in. And I'm just going to use the ticks here to turn off the floor tom, the bass drum, the two rack toms on here. We don't want the ride or the crash symbol. We don't want the throne, and we can just turn off most of the emblems apart from this one on the snare that we're going to leave on. And that just makes my model a little bit easier to manage for the next 15 minutes or so. And then what we can do is we've got an environment on here. And again, for the purpose of now, I'm just going to turn that off. I don't really care about the environment right now. I'm going to turn that back on at the end. But there's some things that I want to talk you through and share with you in here, which are going to be useful. So the first thing, which is a little bit random from a visualization perspective, is I actually want to create a shadow plane on the floor or a ground on the floor and assign it a shadow material, which will tell VRED that there is something there that it can cast shadows onto, but it doesn't actually have any effect with regards to a piece of geometry. So we could bring this through from Inventor if we wanted to, or any other CAD system, but we've got tools to create primitives inside of VRED. So bottom left of my screen here, I'm just going to make sure that I'm within my scene, and I'm going to say that I want to add, I'm going to create geometry, and I'm just going to create a simple plane. Okay. For the purpose of this, the whole kit, you know, they're fairly big, these kits, so I'm just going to go maybe 3 meters by 3 meters. I'm not too fussed about the resolution. It's not curved. There's no matter there with regards to the resolution of this thing. So I'm just going to create it and stick it in. It's come in front ways rather than flat. So the next thing I want to do is show you the transformation tools, because whilst in my case this drum set's come in nice and normal with regards to my scene and on the floor. In your case, it might not. So with an object selected, we've got two options. We can either use the transform tools at the top. We can click and then use the gizmos here to move this around, but you do need to hold down Shift and click on those to move this around. Or we can click and hold and change it from a transform to a rotation or a scale. And again, we can change this with regards to its position. Personally, I'm a bit lazy. I personally like to use the transform tool down here. And then I can just either type in or use these sliders to make my life a little bit easier. So with this here, I've got sliders to move it around if I wanted to. Or we can just zero everything and then just grab the rotation 90 degrees in the X. Okay. Generally speaking, that should be on the floor because we created it at the origin anyway. But if it wasn't, we can either transform it, or if I make this window here big enough, I'm used to having two screens up at the same time. Come on, little mouse. There we go. We've got to move to origin, which would just stick it on the floor for you as well. So we've got our floor there, and that's just going to be used as a shadow plane, just to cast shadows onto the floor. Now, that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I've got this geometry in here. The geometry is pretty good. It's scaled correctly. It's the right way up. So I'm going to jump straight into adding some materials because generally we just want to get started and get something out of here. So I'm going to turn off the graph for now. I'm going to go into the materials section. You can ping this on the side of the screen if you want to. You can dock it either way. I'm going to leave mine floating just because that's how I have it upstairs when I get onto multiple monitors. And then in my materials, what we have here is a couple of different views. Let's just zoom out here a little bit. So we've got our library here, which is everything that's in the model. So there's already a shadow surface in the model that we can use. So I'm just going to grab that shadow and drag and drop it onto that plane. You'll notice it goes transparent, but from a rendering perspective, it now knows that there's something there that's looking for shadows. It will cast shadows on that transparent material and make them appear like they are on your environment floor, which is really, really beneficial. It also allows you then to go and start baking things in more detail to make things quicker when it comes to doing your rendering. The next thing we want to do is look at some materials for our set. Again, we've just got cymbal with the hardware and we've got a snare drum on there as well. So I'm going to start with putting on some materials onto the hardware and make it look a little bit nicer from a metal perspective. We'll put some material on the cymbals and then we'll try and make a nice brush metal or something like that to go around the side of the snare drum. So I could use some library materials, but I'm just going to do everything from scratch just to really try and talk you through step-by-step process of how we can make this look the way that we want. So what I'm going to do is say, let's create a new material. And if we go to create material, we've got a load of presets. And these presets are not there to give you a specific look or a specific texture, but they'll give you certain options. So if you choose a brushed metal, it will give you some brush textures or some brush bumps that you can play with. If I choose a metallic hard paint, it will give me flecks and specks that I can play with to make it look the way that I want. For the purpose of this, I can just go ahead and say that I want to have some metal. I could use either chrome or I could use brush metal. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to say use chrome. By default, that will come in and look really shiny, which I don't want. I don't want an overly shiny model here. So I'm going to change the name of that. Rather than chrome, we're just going to call this hardware metal. I want to preview that on a ball here. And then I can come down and start changing some of the options. So we've got a reflection color. Obviously, the higher white value that is, the more intense that's going to be. So I'm just going to drop that down a little bit. And I'm going to up the smear, which will just make the chrome less mirrorable-like and more fogged if you were to look at it from a reflective perspective. And then I'm going to change the metal from a highly reflective chrome to something that maybe is going to suit this more. So maybe we could choose an aluminium or a silver. You know, these things can be shiny. I don't want them massively shiny, so I'm just going to choose an aluminium more than anything else. And just play around a little bit with these settings just to bring this down to something that I'm a little bit more happy with. Once you've got that to a point that you're happy, we just zoom into our model and drag and drop it over the components. And if I zoom in here, this is where you really start to see that baked ambient occlusion. You know, just look at this without anything on it and you can see the different lightnesses of the materials without even doing anything to it. So let's drag and drop our hardware material onto each one of these. And because of the way that this is imported, you'll see other components will start to take on that same texture, mainly because they had the same texture inside of Inventor or SolidWorks. So it will reuse them. Okay, so we're just going to ping that onto some of the textures on the hi-hat stand. Let's also go with this one here and the tightening nuts here. We'll put a slightly different material on this collar just because we can. Same material on this shaft. We'll use some different materials on these grippers there. And then we're going to come up to the symbol area. I'm not doing everything just because we just don't have time to do absolutely everything on here. But I want to get enough on there to make it look half decent. So a little bit on there. Let's get the tightening nut there. And I'm just going to put it on all of these just to give them something great. The next thing I'm going to do is just have something that's ever so slightly different. So maybe we're going to add a second material. Let's this time go for a brushed metal just to give it a different texture. Not because it's right for the purpose of this, but just to give it something that's different. Again, I'm going to just play around with the glossy color and make it a little bit darker, but I want this to be more silver, but less shimmery. And this time I'm going to go down and just make it silver rather than aluminium. And I'm going to drag and drop that onto the other components that I haven't yet added a material to in this scene, just to give it a little bit of difference with regards to its look and feel. I don't know if that's actually already got one on. I think it has, so we'll ignore that. I'm going to use a rubber material, so let's go to, have I got one in here for rubber just to save me a bit of time? No, I haven't. So let's go to add again, create material, and then somewhere in here I think I've got, is there a rubber? I thought there was a rubber. Tire, that's good enough. Let's use the tire material. Let's just change the color and make this black as black and the glossy color pretty black as well. And whilst these are felt in reality, I'm just going to use a rubber on there just so it looks the right kind of color. I could make it look like my V-drum set by making it all rubber, but I'm not going to. Let's add that to the feet. One, that's added it to all of them. Lovely. Doesn't look like I've added my hardware metal to that leg, but I think it's just the light more than anything else. And then we've got something that looks pretty good from that perspective. One thing I like doing with renders is throwing in detail here and there. So it might be that you have something really over the top for a specific piece of equipment. So let's put a really shiny screw in there just to change the tilt angle of this bottom hat. And then finally, let's add another material in here. Again, I'm going to choose the chrome, or maybe the brushed metal actually for the purpose of this. I'm going to call it symbol. And then I'm going to change my colours. So with regards to this, if I change this glossy colour here and just make that kind of yellowy sort of metalish colour, and I'm just going to drag and drop that straight onto this symbol. And again, just by replacing those materials, you get an instant wow factor with this. It looks fantastic. And just by doing that, I think that looks great. It's probably not quite the right colour. They're maybe a little bit paler than this, but without sitting here, I could sit and play for hours with this kind of thing. But I'm quite happy with that. It looks pretty good. And already, the general look and feel of that hi-hat is looking really, really nice. If I go and do the same thing to that snare drum now. So let's go, start at the bottom. We're going to have our rubber material for the feet. We're going to have our hardware metal for the stand around here. Again, I'm being quite lazy. I'm just going to say this is all this kind of black chrome-esque material. Any drummers out there, Pearl do a really nice black chrome kit, which is really yummy. But I'm not allowed one of those, so we'll ignore that completely. And then we'll put our different metal on these hinges. Great. And maybe on the actual snare stand itself, we'll have this different metal just to give it just a bit of difference more than anything else. We're not actually going to see the snare underneath here, so whilst I could assign a nice shiny material to that, I'm not going to bother because we're not going to actually flip it round. But what we will have is that brushed metal on the rims. We're going to use our chrome on all of the lugs. We're going to use our let's use our brushed metal on all of the nuts here, and just zoom out a little bit and just spin this around just to see if I've captured kind of everything that I want to. Let's just go and get the snare over here, and we're going to add a bit of that, we're going to add a bit of that, and we're going to add a bit of that, just to give this some different textures. Beautiful. And then we need something for the skin here. So this is, I could probably just use this nice white plastic. It's not quite what it is in reality, but it pops quite nicely in the scene. Now, I've not given everything a material. You know, we're limited in these sessions once I've finished rabbiting to about half an hour. Although maybe one day we'll do a nice long one as a bit of feedback and go through something that's a bit more intense. But you start to see, just by adding a few materials, we start to get something that really looks quite nice. And if I'd have actually done something realistic and started using some very specific materials, this would really start to pop and come to life. Let's just bring this black out. I'm not a huge fan of black drum kits. I think they look better when they're really colourful. A nice red wine or a sunburst or something like good old Ringo Starr used to have, which is kind of what I'm going to go for now. So let's just create a final material. I'm going to use brush metal, and I'll also create a car paint one just to show you the process. Let's just call it drum shell, just so that we can identify it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change the glossy colour, and I'm going to use a Man Machine Orange because why wouldn't I? And then with that, what we can do is start changing the roughness. So if I drop that drum shell material on here and just zoom in, we can start looking at the roughness of this material. So let's go with something quite shiny like a gold. Let's turn on, no, we don't need a clear coat. Let's not have a clear coat. Brush orientation is fine. We don't want a texture for the glossiness, but what we do want is a bump to make it look brushed. So I'm just going to use structure, and what that will do is it won't tell it to go and use a specific bump map or normal map that you've got from a texture site or made yourself, but it's going to use these roughness to allow us to control how things look. So I'm going to turn on that texture, and I'm going to start playing around with the intensity and the weight of that, just so it looks something a little bit nicer. So with that intensity turned up a little bit, I can start to see the roughness on this material, which is great. And let's just say, do we want anything on there? No, I don't think we need anything on there. We don't want any of that. We don't need any of that. So now if we come back and start playing around with this, we can start changing the style of this. I can make it really big, but I'm going to make this quite small so it looks kind of like a brushed metal. And then we can just play around with the scaling to the side. And if I do that enough, I should be able to get something that I'm quite happy with, which looks pretty good. If I was to change this to a more Man Machine-y grey, you'd kind of get that look and feel of an old Ringo kit. But we're going to keep it in orange because we can. There we go. So let's keep it in orange, and then from there, let's just spin this around so we're looking at it from the front. Let's go ahead and open up our scene graph and turn our environment back on. Everything looks a little bit low, unfortunately, which is a surprise considering I told everything to go on the floor. So let's just select everything and just use a manual transform with a move rather than a rotate, just to bring this up a little bit. Happy days. And then when you've got something that you're happy with, and again, I've not massively played with regards to the camera here, but when we've got something that we're happy, we can start turning things up. So if I turn on anti-aliasing and ray tracing and just sit here for a few minutes whilst we bring this session to a close, this will now go through and it will make my reflections a lot more realistic. It will make my shiny materials and maps look a little bit nicer. The anti-aliasing will take any rough edges and smooth those out. Not that I've got them in this particular model. But the idea here is it's now ray tracing using my graphics card. So we get this little countdown or count up timer, goes between 0 and 100, and it'll just sit there iterating and iterating and iterating. And actually quite quickly on majority of components here, you'll see them pretty clean. Where we've got the shadows in between the hi-hats here, and certainly on this material, it's going to take a little bit longer for it to iterate through the noise and create you a sharp image. But generally speaking, very quickly, we get something that is actually pretty good. And just rather than waiting for that, if we zoom into an area of detail and just say, do you know what, let's turn on a few more lights in the scene and say anti-alias and ray trace. if we just sit here for a minute, you'll start to instantly see the additional quality that ray trace will bring. I wish we had more time so that we could have opened up one that's already ray traced, but there's no option other than waiting for it to do its thing. But to get that kind of quality, and all I've really done is I've imported a model. I have baked my ambient occlusion and my illumination. I have added some pretty bog standard textures. I've not really spent any time looking at custom diffuse maps or custom bump maps or normal maps. It's pretty much an off-the-shelf, drop it in and hit the button. And when you see, this kind of crispness, the mixture of soft and hard shadows, and just the detail level that you get, it's astronomical. And even without the ray tracing, to get that kind of look and feel when you get in close to your product so that it looks nice, it's one button hit into a VR headset just by going view, display, and starting the OpenVR HMD. You can get it on Oculus or a Vive. You really get the ability to pull off some fantastic visuals in here. And then once everything's set up from a rendering perspective, let's just turn off the hi-hat. Let's get the snare a little bit bigger and just kick off one final render. Let's look at it from the other side so that we're seeing it from a drummer's view. And then turn everything on. Give that a few seconds while I finish talking. It's a great product. It works really well. It's actually very easy to use. So if you've got access to it, give it a download. Doesn't matter whether it's professional or design. The same functionality here that I've shown. The interface might look slightly different for design, but the same functionality is true. And once you've got a model that looks great, start playing around with depth of field, motion blur, and all that kind of stuff. It really comes quite quickly and quite easily. And then the upper advantages of VRED is throw it onto a power wall to do a presentation, walk around your models in VR singly or collaboratively. It's a great tool and it works really, really well. And actually, surprisingly, it's really good at big models. So anyone out there that's got huge models and they want to visualize them, bring them into here. It works really well. Play around with the tessellation. First import might take a little while, but once the geometry is in VRED's format, it's really fast, the file sizes are small, and generally speaking, it looks really, really nice. And really, that's kind of all I was going to show today, but I'm going to leave the screen up while I do the little usual outro. So again, if this has been useful, drop us a comment, check us out on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook and all of the others. We're regularly doing these kind of different sessions all over our social media. So please follow them, please watch them, please give us your feedback so we know what you want to see next time. Next week, we'll be on again Thursday at 2 p.m. Haven't quite decided what we're going to do yet, but if anyone's got any suggestions, then drop us a comment, drop us a mail or a message, and we'll do what we can to get that content up for you. But until then, I'll pre-warn you, I'm going to be like a kid at Christmas next week because of multiple reasons. Number one, Top Gun Maverick comes out on Wednesday. Good. Number two, we've got Obi-Wan comes out next week. Geek out. Number three, what's the other one that's coming out? Stranger Things 4. So I'm going to be like a kid at Christmas. I'll need popcorn, nachos, chilies, cheese, the lot. Not a good day for Weight Watchers next week, but hey ho, it'll be fun. So without further ado, I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to leave this on for a few seconds more, but I'm going to say thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the week. Enjoy the sunshine, and I will speak to you all next week. Take care. Goodbye.